talking about healing, and I'm excited to be sharing. I'm going to be sharing, I felt like I wanted to start sharing from the Gospels because I was thinking about, you know how back in the day everyone used to wear those bracelets and all those things that said WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I feel like we've kind of gotten away from that to people making doctrines based off of like, what did Job say or what did this person say, but instead of just looking at what Jesus said and did and then going based off of that. So I just felt like that was an important place to start. And before I start, I wanted to focus on, is it God's will to heal? So this past week, you know, I have read through the Gospels a few times and went through, and because I was like, okay, it's a big focus of his. Like, a lot of times it'll say they went preaching the word, teaching, and healing. So it was just as big of a focus as preaching and teaching was healing. And it's because it proved his love, it proved him, it was a sign and a wonder for people. So they followed him, you'll see, and he did these things, and the multitude followed him because of the healing. And because of his preaching and teaching, obviously. But since I'm focusing on healing, that's why I'm bringing this up. But the thing that I wanted to point out was, if I had a gift right now sitting on a table for someone here, but I never told that person, would anyone just get up and open that gift here? You guys wouldn't, because you'd be like, we don't know whose gift that is, that's not mine. Even if it was for that person didn't know, they wouldn't just get up and go like, let me see what's in. Nobody does that. Because they're like, that's somebody's gift, we're not going to touch it. So that's why I think it's important to understand if healing is for us, because we won't receive it if we don't know it's for us. And for a lot of people, they think it's not for them, so they're like, I'm not even opening that, that's not for me. And it's exactly how a gift would be. Like, we wouldn't open that gift if we didn't think it was for us, and we wouldn't receive what's in that gift if we don't know it's for us. So I want to show you through the Gospels how it is for you and how it is for everyone, and it's for today. And the reason I say this is because there's a lot of teaching against it. Like, it's not for today, it's not for everyone, it's not. And it's funny because I was on just reading this article that I had come across about it, and right away I was like, okay. The person caught my attention because they spoke specifically about why it wasn't for everyone, why not everyone should be healed or can be healed. And they use one example out of John 5 that was about the man at the pool of Bethesda. And the reason they used that is because they said, well, look, only one person got healed out of that whole group that was sitting at the pool of Bethesda waiting to be healed. Jesus only healed one person. But I wanted to, before starting and pointing other things out, I wanted to make this point. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are 4 different people writing from their perspective, what they saw, heard, and were experienced, right? So it would be like taking 4 of us here and saying, hey, we all experienced something together, and saying, how did you experience it? Write what you experienced. Everyone's going to have different perspectives. Sometimes with Johnny, when we're studying the Bible together, like, we'll both read the same exact thing, and I'll say, did you notice this? And he'll be like, no, I didn't notice that. I did notice this. And I'm like, well, I didn't notice that. So when you're reading through the Gospels, think about that when you're reading all of these things. That sometimes, why I didn't like that this person was kind of making like a theology from this, like people can't be healed, was because he said, no one else got healed. Well, what if the writer was, because there's nothing there that indicated that no one else was healed. There was nothing. All it indicated was that a specific person was healed. So I'm like, we can't really make a doctrine or anything out of, well, no one else was healed, because we don't know. What if that story was just told from the perspective of that specific story? He could have been healing people just like he healed multitudes of people. And like in Matthew, you'll see like Matthew talks a lot about he healed them all. He talks about groups a lot. He does give a few references, a good amount of references, I think. Well, no, Matthew, I wrote all of them. I went through the whole Matthew, through each gospel, looking for all of their healing. Almost all of his references are to groups of people, rather than to single stories. There's only a few single stories that he gave. But then you go to John, and his was more in reference to specific stories of healing, rather than the groups. He didn't talk as much about groups. So seeing that from that perspective, and not, especially because at the end of John, in John 21, he says, if Jesus did so much that if it were written in all the books, the world couldn't contain all the books. that of all the things he did. So that's why we have to be careful of not making a doctrine, but instead following what the actual Bible says and going based off of that. So with that said, I wrote down, and it's interesting, and at least from what I was going through quickly, and after all of the reading I've done, in Matthew, there was 9 different times he talks about healing. In Mark 12, in John 5, in Luke 13 different times. And in those times, that's all of the scriptures that there was on healing, whether it was be the crowd or whether it be a person, a specific person. But nowhere do you see that he didn't heal. Everywhere you look, it talks about he healed them all. I'll just reference a few things that it says. He healed all who were sick, healing every sickness. This is all in Matthew. He tells the blind man, do you believe I'm able to? The blind man said yes. He was healed. He healed them all. He healed their sick. He healed them. So these are just like little words I took out of each of these different ones. We see in Mark, he healed Peter's mother-in-law. At the beginning of Mark, he healed all who were sick. He healed a leper. He healed a paralytic. So these are just examples. If you go through, you'll see all the stories of how he healed. But the only time, and this is a big thing, that you'll see that he said he could not heal was in his own hometown. And there's 2 times in the Gospels where you see someone not being healed or not being delivered. And that's in his own hometown, and it specifically says, we'll go there, to Mark 6. It's at the very beginning. It says, then he went out from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many hearing him were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? And what wisdom is this which is given to him, that such mighty works are performed by his hands? So once again, we see that the healing and all these things that he did, these were mighty works. And is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary and brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us? So they were offended at him. So this was offense to them, that he was healing and doing all these things, and that he was just another person like them. But Jesus said to them, the prophet is not without honor except in his own country, among his own relatives and in his own house. And now he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid hands on a few sick people and healed them. And then it tells us why he didn't do mighty works there, and he didn't heal a lot of people. And it says, and he marveled because of their unbelief. Then he went about the villages in a circuit teaching. So he went and taught after that. But 2 words that stuck out to me is they were offended by him because this was someone that was among them that they didn't believe to be the Messiah. And the other thing, and so they were offended by the fact that he was healing and doing mighty works. And then also he marveled, he was surprised, he was amazed, he couldn't believe it, that because of their unbelief, they didn't receive. So that's the only time we see that Jesus was like, he couldn't heal very many people because he wasn't accepted in his own hometown. And I can see why, because a lot of times it's a lot harder for our own family members or friends that are around us to receive something from us, because they're like, I remember going back to Honduras after, I lived there for a few years in high school. I moved away. Well, everyone knew us as their friends, their family that they had. And then coming back there and people being like, what happened? Who are you? We don't know this side of you. And it was difficult for some people to receive, like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to have you pray. So I can see why he's saying this. Like, his own people were like, well, you're just Jesus, the son of Mary, like a carpenter's son. Like, so that's the only place, and you can go, this is why I think it's important that we each read our own Bible and we each go through all the Gospels to see, we can see, if there's nowhere other than that it says that. And the other place was the disciples. So these were the 2 places that you see. And those, you can see the story of the disciples not being able to deliver someone. In Mark 9, verse 11. Okay, and we see the story of the disciples not being able to heal. And he said, and this is what it says in Mark 9:14. And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around him, and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed and running to him, greeting him. And he asked the scribes, "What are you discussing with them?" Then one of the crowd answered and said, "Teacher, I brought you my son, who is a mute spirit. And wherever it seizes him, it throws him down, he foams at the mouth, gnashes at his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not." He answered them and said, "O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me." Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. He asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes." And I'll focus on that on another day, but that's important. If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "Deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more." Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, "He is dead." So not only did he deliver him and heal him of a deaf and dumb spirit, but he also died, according to the people. But according to them. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately. And this is where I think it's important to see. We see that they couldn't heal, and he's like rebuking, like he corrected them, but then they come privately and ask him, "Why could we not cast it out?" So he said to them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." This is why it's important to not take things out of context. If we would have just read that, like the beginning part of the story, well, they just couldn't. So move on. Like they just couldn't let Jesus do it. Oh, well, none of us can do it. But they did something important. They asked, "Why couldn't we do this? Why couldn't we do what you just did?" A lot of people will come like with a problem, like, okay, this person didn't get healed when they prayed for him, or they didn't heal their own selves or their family, whoever it may be. And they're like, "Well, it doesn't work." I've had that happen a lot, where people are like, "Well, healing's not for everyone. I tried and I didn't get it." Well, did you ask God like they did, like the disciples said, "Jesus, what happened? Why didn't we do it?" And he always gives an answer. The Bible says, "Ask and you shall receive." It doesn't say if you ask, well, it depends on the situation. It always says, "Ask and you shall receive," knock on the door, knock and it will be opened. Just continually says things like this, reminding of us this, and this is a good example. The first thing, as soon as they ask him, he answers, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting." It's important to look at what he's talking about. This kind of unbelief. Yeah. He wasn't talking about the spirit that came out. That just comes out by your word. By Jesus, in the name of Jesus, come out. But he was talking about their unbelief. Why? Because they needed to pray and fast at that moment. Like, you had unbelief. You needed to get that out so you could just believe for this boy to be healed.
Because it would be hard to believe for a child that's had this all their life, and they're like, "Oh, well, this is going to be, he's had it all his life." Like,
and what is the thing? How do we know that that's what it was? Look ahead. Look back. Go back to the part where he says, "If you believe, all things are possible to him." And then he's like, this only comes out by prayer and fasting. A lot of people...
And the first response he said to them was, "Faithless generation."
Faithless. You didn't believe.
So,
so he's
all
giving...
throughout that story, he's addressing unbelief.
Yes. So that's why they couldn't heal or deliver this boy, because they had unbelief. And the thing is that unbelief is easy to get out. For one, all that man said was, it just reminds me of the story recently when I was praying for Benji, that I really did have unbelief. I felt like, okay, I'm looking at his arm and it looks broken. It looks like it's not well, but I'm going to pray. And I'm like, okay, but I have unbelief, God. And that was the thing that I told him, like, I have unbelief, please help. Just like he did, I used that and I remembered that and I was like, help me in my unbelief. And then the next thing we know, he's like, I'm fine. And, moving his hand like nothing. But I do believe if I would have just been like, well, I don't know what happened, we probably would have ended up in the hospital. And the reason I share, like, I really, I've just seen the results of healing in our family and how we don't have, it's not because we don't believe in doctors or we don't want to use doctors, it's because we haven't needed to use doctors. Like, we've been able to keep ourselves healthy by just these things that I've learned. It was probably the first thing that I was like, man, we're always sick. Let me learn as much as I can about this. And it's been the thing that I focused a lot on because it helps me every day. Especially with kids, you know, kids getting around other kids and kids, you know, this. And so it's really, so that like, just there alone, if like that present, if you couldn't open it, there's like, you know how sometimes people wrap a present really tight and it's like, it's so impossible. There's always a solution. You get scissors, you cut it, there's always a solution. Well, the same thing with God. He's like, this is your gift. Do you want to open it? I have the solution for you. I can help you open this gift. Do you want it? Okay. So it's us asking because Jesus will show us. And even that takes faith, right? To ask God, why am I not receiving this healing? What's happening that I'm not seeing this happen? Well, Jesus will show you. I've had plenty of times where I talk about this in my book one time where Alice was really constipated. It was getting to be a really big problem. You know, we were concerned that maybe there was something else to it. You know, we were seeing this kid be constipated day after day and screaming and crying. And I finally realized that I have fear. I have fear associated with her being in constipation. And so I'm like, okay, God, I rebuke a spirit of fear. I do not have fear. My kids, you said perfect love casts out fear in your love. You said that I don't have a spirit of fear, but I have a spirit of power, love, and self-control. So I remembered that. I prayed for a second, and the next thing you know is she pooped. And she pooped nice and soft, just like I prayed. It's funny to me in the story. I say, like, as I'm praying, I'm like, God, I just pray that she would poop smoothly, like that ice cream. And like, I was really desperate because I was like, you know, I was like, please let it just be smooth so it doesn't hurt coming out, so she's not screaming shit. And the next thing I know, he's clapping and he's all excited. Yay, you did it. And never again did we have a constipation problem with her again. And, but I do believe it was because I was like, God, but this was weeks after dealing with this, I finally realized I need to ask Jesus. Why haven't I asked God? Like, what is it? What do I have? What am I missing here? And it was like this. The moment I asked, it was like, you have fear. Oh, okay, I have fear. I rebuked the fear and I moved on, and she was healed of constipation. And it seems something so small, but imagine it's not fun, yes, you know, you've experienced it. But I mean, and think about it, a lot of times we'll want to focus on these big things. They're like, well, he healed the left. Well, yes, you can get to that point, but why don't we start with the small things? Like the things that are way smaller. For me, a fever, a cold, a constipation is smaller than when I've had to pray for someone having, you know, something coming out of their neck that I'm like, okay, I can see this big, huge bulge, you know. But it's helped me to learn these things and practice them now in my life, because I realized this is a gift that God had for me, that all I had to do was open it and understand. It's like when you open a present and you've never used it before, right? You get this present and you're like, well, I've never used this before, but it has a little instruction manual, and you start figuring out, you put it together, and then you're like, well, how do you use it? Oh, okay, and you start figuring it out, and then, but what do? You put the effort to research, right? To read that manual. Sometimes the guys don't want to, and then they have to come back to it because they didn't do it and it's not working properly. But guess what? Everyone comes back to, like, how? Either you go on YouTube and you start researching, you do all this work, but then with God's word and his healing, we don't want to put in the work. It's too hard. It puts a lot, because it does put a lot of pressure. And a lot of people don't want to carry the pressure of healing, because it's not as complicated as it is. It's just about understanding. It's like reading that manual. Once you read the manual, you're like, okay, I got this. I can make this work, you know? So the other thing I wanted to just point out was, like I said, you can read the Gospels and you can see it was always God's will to heal. The only places he couldn't heal were those two places. Well, he couldn't heal in his own hometown because of their unbelief. The disciples couldn't heal because of their unbelief. And also, but so you might say, well, okay, but that was for them. That was for the disciples. That was for Jesus. First of all, people will say that was for them, and some people will say that's for now, but that's not all of us. That's only the disciples. And okay, so that's probably where I think it's the most important part let me go there 1 second. Mark 16. Oh, not Mark 16. Sorry. Let's see. I think I actually want to go to Matthew, the end of Matthew. Am I going through it too fast, or is this?
I don't
just getting
know.
okay. I want to go to the end of Matthew. Hopefully. I think I have this. Okay.
She left. Yeah.
Yes. So it'll be somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. 1 second. I can't believe that maybe I'm just having like a moment. Sorry.
Mark 16. And with the sign, these signs shall follow them who believe.
Okay, yes. I don't know why I didn't.
Is it that?
16. Where are you saying?
17.
Oh, yes. Where did I go to at first? I thought I went to Mark.
Probably looking towards the end of the
Okay.
chapter.
So yes, Mark 16. And then it's in verse 14 it starts. So this is how we can know this is for all. And this one solidified it for me when I read it the first time, and that's where I was like, okay, I got this. This is because for a long time I was like, well, how does this apply to me? But it just was like, okay, I got it, and then I ran with it. It says, later he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table, and he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. And he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. So he's talking to the disciples, and he's like, go and preach. And he's like, he who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. And I think this is interesting because pretty much every Christian denomination does this. They all baptize. Everyone agrees with this. Everyone will baptize and agrees that, if those who believe they're going to be baptized, and those who do not will be condemned. But we tend to skip this next verse because these are the hard things, and it says, and these signs will follow those who believe. It doesn't say those who are disciples, those who are apostles, those who are teachers. No, it says those who believe, and it just told us who those people are. The ones who believe and are baptized. Those are the ones where he's talking to. So that's any Christian person in the world that believes in Jesus and is baptized. Well, what I'm saying is like anyone who believes in Jesus, this is who he's talking to. And okay. And these signs will follow those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons. They will speak with new tongues. They will take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it will by no means hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. And that's not the only place. At the end of the Gospels, each one, he says things like, teach. In Matthew, he talks about teaching what he's commanded them. And at the beginning of Matthew, he commands them the same things. Lay hands on the sick. And in each Gospel, he commands them the same thing. It's just their perspective of what he's saying. So, like I said, in Matthew, he tells them, go lay hands on the sick. And he tells them to go preach. And we see that in Mark. And we see that. So, this solidified it for me. Like, it was like, okay, he's telling me that I'm a person who believes. So, I have to make sure these are the signs that will follow me. It doesn't say that I'm going to make these signs happen. It's signs will follow me. Why? Because Jesus, we as people, like, it's so hard when people are like, well, you didn't, well, no, Jesus in me did this. So, like, for example, Jesus works through us. But it's like, if we turn off the light here, the light's just not going to work, right? But if we switch that power, light will come out of it. It's kind of like that with us. We're the vessel where his power comes out. But ultimately, this lamp doesn't produce its own light. It needs a source, right? Well, it's the same thing. God works through us to show these signs. That's why it says these signs will follow those who believe. We just have to lay hands on the sick and they will recover because his signs follow. So when we lay hands on the sick, they shall recover because this is where a lot of people get caught up. They think, well, if I lay hands on the sick and they don't recover, but see, you're already thinking wrong.
That you're going to fail.
Yes, you're already thinking that you're going to fail. So people end up already failing and then they don't see the results, but that's not faith. Remember, faith is the substance of things hoped for. So it's already the thing happened without us seeing it. Like, that's how I like to say it. The substance. It's the substance if it's like having that thing already there. So even though we don't see it. So for example, if I'm going to lay hands on the sick, I want to know that I believe before I lay hands on them that this person is going to be healed because I believe it before I even put my hands on it. So yes, that's why I believe that it's why he said that thing about fasting and prayer. Sometimes before prison, maybe if I haven't been there in a while, especially when you're going and you're in it already, or you've been doing it for weeks and weeks and weeks, or you're working, you've been in ministry a long time, it gets easier and it gets easier and you flow through it. But I remember sometimes I'll go back, like if I haven't gone to prison, which I haven't in a while, I'll get back and I'll be like, before I get there, I'm like a little bit overwhelmed and I've had to say, okay, no, I've had to be in prayer, I've had to fast before because of it, like I might have unbelief, so I need to get that unbelief out, so when I go lay hands on the sick, I know that it's not my power, it's Jesus' power flowing through me to heal the people, to cast out demons. It's in his name, and I think we take on, and this is why people don't like to, why it's scary for people, because it puts us in a place of having to do our part, right? But that's the truth. Jesus is already sitting at the right hand of the Father. He's already done all the work. He said, my power I give you, right? He's left us his power here on earth to go lay hands on the sick so that they can recover, to go cast out demons out of people, to go do all of the things that he commanded us to do, but now it's our part. And a lot of people think it's God's part. So they're like, God, please do this. And he's like, I think he's up there like, nope, I already did it. What do you mean? I don't need to do any more. You need to do it. Because it's not that he says, go pray for God to heal the sick. He says, go lay hands on the sick. He doesn't even say, this word here, it doesn't say go pray for the sick. It says go lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. And the only time we say that it actually says pray for the sick is when it says bring the sick to the elder so that they can pray the prayer of faith. And that prayer of faith is a prayer of believing, right? They believe, and so they heal the person because maybe they couldn't receive it themselves. But, and the reason I started getting carried off into other things, but I think it's so important, and it's another place that I picked up on today that I was thinking about on the story as I was thinking about this, is for people to say like, oh, how do we know like that healing was important? Jesus, when John the Baptist sent his disciples to go ask if Jesus, if he was the coming one, if he was the Messiah, what was Jesus' response? In Luke 7:22,
For them to watch and see.
Yes, he's like, Jesus answered and said to them, go and tell the John. First of all, before he did that, it says right before in verse 21, and he says, in that very hour he cured many of infirmities, afflictions, and evil spirits. So they came to him, asked him that, and while he made them wait, he didn't just answer them. He was like, they're asking him, are you the coming one? And in that very hour, he cured all these people of their infirmities, afflictions, evil spirits, and to many blind he gave sight. And then he answered them and said to them, go and tell John the things you have seen and heard. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have the gospel preached them, and blessed is he who is not offended because of me. So right there you see, this was important to Jesus. He's like, you want to know if I'm the coming one? I'm healing. That was the biggest thing he said. I'm healing. Look, what did you just see me do? I healed all these people. This is in Luke 7, verse 20 and 22. And so it's important to see how important it was to Jesus. Why? Because he even says, without signs and wonders, they won't believe. And this is why when we go to prison, we do healing crusades, healing tours, because it proves God's love to them. People are like, he cared enough that, I always laugh that in prison we'll have people like, oh back is so bad from these hard, stiff beds. And then they're like, he cared enough about the fact that my back is stiff from these hard beds that I put myself into, but he healed me of a back pain from that. And that shows to them that he loves them. And, you know, that helps them to then, what even throughout all the Gospels, you'll see, he did signs and wonders, and guess what? The multitudes followed him. They were amazed by his teaching, his preaching, and his signs and wonders, his healing, his deliverance. All of these things, they followed him because of that. So I just wanted to really make an emphasis on how much Jesus did throughout the Gospels, because we could focus on things that people will come up with, but I like to say, like the other day I heard somebody saying, like, why wouldn't you focus on the good thing rather than the thing, not only the good thing, but people will be like, well, Job. Okay, but Job was wrong. God called him out. Why would we focus on what Job said if Job was wrong for what he said? Oh, well, Job's friends, or this, well, those were all people that were rebuked because of what they said. Oh, well, you know, well, what about this person? Okay, but if you take it out of context, I won't even get into it too much, but my point is to why not focus on what he did do rather than what he didn't do. And even if you focus on what he didn't do in healing, it's very small compared to what he did do, and he gives us a reason for why. So I think it's important. Does anyone have any questions?
I think
I'm not very good at ending in the
no, I think
That play
Done.
I think Paul was aware of that too, because he said, I regard no man according to the flesh. And then another place he said, I've determined to know nothing among you except Christ. Yes. And I think for that reason, because when you're talking about Jesus being in his own hometown, and you use the example of you going back to Honduras, if you think about BC Jesse, before Christ Jesse, all of your friends who saw you, they regard you after your flesh.
Yes.
And they say, this was a wild girl who did all these wild things, but it's true.
Yeah.
And so then they see you talking about, hey, Jesus, and hey, if you have anything that you want prayer for or healing, come up. It's really hard for people not to get to that place of being envious or offended by you, because why? Because they're seeing you after your flesh. They're seeing you after who you are and what you've done. And the same thing with Jesus. If you're in your hometown, they're like, hey, you're a carpenter, man. You're nothing. What gives you the right to think that you can come and tell people that their sins are forgiven, or that they can be healed if they have any infirmities? It offends people, or in other words, they get envious. Like, why should you think that you're given a platform? I'm more deserving of that platform.
Yeah.
This person isn't deserving of that. Like, I'm a better person, you know?
Yeah.
That's the mindset that people have. So it really does help when you think, like when Paul's saying, I regard nobody according to the flesh. Why? Because it's real easy to get into that mindset where you're seeing somebody after the flesh, and then that's it. You're no longer going to be able to actually see what God is doing through them. And in today's world, that's what happens with people when they get offended. When you say, oh, we went to prison and I healed somebody.
Oh,
If you say
yeah.
I healed somebody, they will just like right there on the spot crucify you. You, who are you? You're nothing.
Yeah.
But we obviously know that the word says that the disciples, they preached the word with boldness, and the Spirit of God in them confirmed their words with signs and wonders following. It's the same thing for us. We know that it's not us, it's Jesus in us. But people just are always looking for the way you say something to like get offended at it. And I think a lot of times it's because they don't understand what you're talking about. So it's better to just like explain away something just because you don't understand it, and to say that person is a false teacher, or that they're preaching stuff that's not right, as opposed to saying, hey, maybe there's something to this thing that I've missed, and I need to go back and study this for myself. And so honestly, I think it's like a really good thing that you're saying. Like, focus on all the good things that he did, not the two to the two situations where you see that he wasn't able to heal, and it's
Well, and
almost,
actually, even if you do focus on those and focus on what he said about those situations,
Yeah.
why couldn't they be healed? Both situations were because of unbelief.
And they luckily these people came back to humbleness. They were humble enough to say like, why couldn't we do it?
Exactly.
Instead of being like, well, it just does.
Like the people in his own hometown, they just didn't get, they didn't
want to be
he
humble.
barely
And
healed
it's like, well,
anybody.
maybe he has something that we're just not seeing, or or people that don't see a healing instead of like going to, like you said, like going to Jesus and just asking. And then it takes humbleness to know that God works through you, that he gives you power to do these things and to not be. And so people can't get past it didn't heal, and then
Yes.
humbleness.
And
to
the
do.
thing is that what I've seen a lot is that people get caught up in, well, I saw this preacher and I think he was fake and he said he healed, but it was just this. And there is a lot of preachers that are going to go around and they're going to pretend like they heal and they're going to do these things like, putting certain, I'm not even going to say what healing, but they're going to do healings that they try to commit. That's going to happen. The Bible talks about there's going to be false teachers and there's going to be false prophets and there's going to be false. But that's why it's important, and why I think it's important to see that this wasn't just for, at the time, Jesus was teaching the disciples so that they could disciple more people and disciple, so that it could be for anyone that wanted this. And it can be for us if we are willing to put in the work to learn about it and understand it and really, really get into like, okay, because then we don't have to go based off of, because a lot of people are waiting. Like I always tell the women at prison, I'm trying to teach you. It was so hard to get this across. I went for years to Lowell here in Marion County. And for years I'd be like, I'm trying, like there was people that were there for all of the years that I was, they would be in the front row and I would want to just like, please listen, because I'm like, you have to wait a whole month before we come back and pray for you guys. I'm like, instead of just learning this, because this is made for everyone, and this is why I believe it's important to see that it's not just for, yes, there are gifts of healing. There are people that are going to that can come in and just literally lay hands and go boom, 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 and everybody in the room is healed. But what if you don't have someone like that? What if someone like that is not around? God's made it so that each one of us, there's no reason. I do this I feel like I use this on a daily basis with 5 kids because someone comes, I got hurt, I got this, my throat, my head, my leg. It's literally every day something. We're a family of 7. Something's gonna come up. And I've had to go from small things to big things, from, believing for fevers to go away to believing for this sickness or that sickness. And so I think it's important. And the thing is, for me, like I said, that was the biggest thing that attracted me, that I was like, oh, I can use this myself in my own house, and I can make sure that my kids are whole and healthy, and I don't have to worry about rushing to the doctor every time. And it's been, Jack, when was the last time? Jack was like 3 months old was the last time we've gone to a doctor's visit for sickness. So he's 8 years old. But because I've learned this so well, that when things come up, I'm like, okay, we're going to pray. And they know. Last year, for example, they ate so bad at school. They were constantly having tons of candy. They were constantly having junk food that they don't normally have around the house. And I would get calls. I got a call from Sophia. Hey, my head hurts one day. And I was just like, people at the school probably think sometimes we're weird, because she called me and she's like, Mom, I have the worst headache. And that she's like, I was at PE and she hadn't eaten breakfast, and then she had junk. And so I was like, okay, you want me to come? My first thought was, you want me to come pick you up? I'm like asking, like, why are you going? She's like, no. And she's like, wanted you to pray for me. And I'm thinking, this lady that probably is there in the office is like, this is so strange. And so I prayed for her, and she's like, okay, Mom, love you, bye. Hung up, didn't hear from her, picked her up in the afternoon. I'm like, how are you doing? Oh yeah, I forgot. The headache went away. And she was like, it was throbbing, it was painful. She called me at least 3 times during the school year for the exact same thing. Mom, my head is hurting. And then I would pray and it would be better, and she was fine. But I can't imagine. First of all, because I live 30 minutes from the school. That wouldn't be fun.
No.
I couldn't stand having to go pick them up, do an extra trip. So even just alone for that,
Yeah.
like I don't have to make extra trips, because I can pray for them over the phone and they'll recover.
I think what Julie said is really important. If you don't come at this from a place of humility.
Yes.
There's a lot of people who have studied their Bible, and the Bible says that knowledge, so if you obtain knowledge, but knowledge puffs up. So you get to a place where you're puffed up with pride, or you've had a lot of the situations and experiences in your life that if you start talking about healing, it puts the responsibility off of blaming God, and people can't handle that, and that's part of that, like, not coming at it from a place of humility. So it's better to just avoid it altogether rather than to humble yourself and say, hey, I could have missed this, and the outcomes could have been changed if I really understood this topic. That's really hard for people because it puts the responsibility off of God and onto us as believers.
But that's hard.
Yeah. But the thing is that, like Jesse was saying, pretty much at the end of every gospel, you see Jesus saying, like, I give you authority over all the power of the enemy, and nothing by any means shall hurt you. Like, when you see that, he's giving us authority as believers, where's the responsibility then? It's in our hands. That means that's our responsibility to have authority over the enemy and over all the evil things that get thrown at us. Well, that's a hot seat for people to sit in that seat and say, okay, so I'm actually, as a believer, responsible for using my authority and keeping these things at bay. Then you can't blame God.
Well, it comes back to the disciples. They could have been offended. He was like,
Yeah.
a faithless generation.
Yeah.
How long do I have to be with you? And their question is, well, what did we do wrong? And they could have been like, our unbelief. Like, how many people get upset because they're like, oh, you're telling me I don't believe? Like, I've had people say that to me. What, you're telling me I don't believe in it? Well, yeah, that's what the Bible says. Like, if you don't believe, then you have unbelief. It's one or the other. So if we are in a place where we're not seeing healing, then we should look at that. Are we believing for this, or are we are not believing? What is our mindset? Are we saying, well, I hope this happens? That's not belief. Are we saying, well, I don't know. I don't know if this is going to work. Well, once again, we're not in belief. So it's really about, like, sometimes people will be like, well, what were you? Well, right before I was praying, I was just thinking this person's going to be running around in a second, or I was imagining them running around so that I could, believe for myself, okay, this is possible, because sometimes it's impossible. I've had people walk up and be like, I can't put my foot down on the ground, I can't walk, and I'm like, okay, well, that's a hard one. Let's, what is it? Or I've had people so it is so important to be humble and be like, well, where am I missing it? Like, that's not an easy thing to ask. Like, where am I
had a
missing it?
situation where I was like, somebody asked me to pray for them, and I was just like, I feel like I was praying for them, but as I was praying, I was just like, God, I feel like I'm just praying like some dead prayer, and I just felt like God was like it was just almost like what can you believe? That's what it was. Like,
Yes.
the Holy Spirit was like, what can you believe for? I was like, I can believe for the pain to be gone right now. I can't believe for like their complete healing of this, but I can believe that they don't have pain right now. And that's what I prayed, and I feel like that got better with the person. Yeah. But it's like he meets us where we're at too in our belief, unbelief. Like,
Exactly.
helping
Like,
us
he
walk
doesn't,
through it.
and that's why I think it's important for us to start working this in our own lives. Because the more we work it in our own lives, then we'll see the areas, okay, well, I'm struggling, like I struggled in the areas of headaches. So I had to really, that was an area where I had to really focus more because for some reason it's a hard area, but also being, and I think I want to talk about this more next week, but being discerning of the situation. Like, how should I be praying? Is this person able to receive? Is this person, and I definitely will be talking about that next week, so.
Yeah, I think it builds confidence. Like, if you take quilting, for example, what's something super small and simple that you could almost do with your eyes closed?
I think the pattern probably is a lot easier with that
Right?
pattern.
Yeah.
So if somebody came to you and said, here's this idea, and you knew it was a simple one, you would probably, without hesitation, be like, yeah, no problem. But then if someone presents you
Like you are having to
right
deal
now,
with.
what are you doing? You have confidence in those smaller things, but now you're stretching yourself.
Yeah.
And you're saying, okay, I'm
Yes.
going to take on a bigger project. That's how it is. That's what Jesse's saying with healing. You start small, and you get confident in those little things, and then now you're ready to move out and take on a bigger project and a bigger project, and then next thing you know, you're stretching for this huge quilt that you have no guidelines for, except for you're trusting that you can get it
But
done.
a lot of people want to do the big thing. Like they're like, I want to get the big quilt done without the pattern, and I'm going to do this. And then they fail, and they're like, well, I'm never. What do? I'm never quilting again, or sewing again, or whatever. And people are, but that's what people do in healing. They'll be like, I'm going to believe for this person not to have cancer, but they've never even believed for a headache or a finger, like their finger hurts and they can't even believe for that. So it's important to start now. Like if you're just learning about this, then start with, like, for me, it was like a sore throat. I would be like, oh, I have a sore throat. And I was like, this is the perfect time to practice on myself. And you know, at first it took me a few days. Now I don't even remember when I've gotten a sore throat, because the moment I have had a sore throat, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be gone and be healed, and it's healed. Because I've learned how to do this, and the same thing with the kids, like, but it's taken practice. You can't start with the big quilt right away. And you would, that's why I think a lot of people get upset. Like a lot of people, especially people that are on fire and they're like, yes, I'm so excited to go do this, and then they're like, they just got saved and they're just like, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna heal the sick, like it says. But they didn't, it's like that little weight that we always like to say. They picked up a 50-pound weight and there's no way. And then they gave up because they were like, I couldn't pick up the 50-pound weight, but why wouldn't you just start with the 2-pound weight? And you'll see it works. You'll see you can pick up that 2-pound weight, and that's exciting. And then eventually you'll get to the 50-pound weight. So, yeah, I guess I'll leave you guys with that.
That was really good.
That was very good.
Here.
Yeah.